My name is Eleanor Wade. I'm 67 years old." By the time the sentence left her mouth, the morning sun had already reached the kitchen tiles and turned the sugar jar into glass fire. Tara stood across from me, a travel mug in her manicured hand, her tone so casual it almost sounded kind. "Your house is perfect for my parents," she said. "They'll move in tomorrow." For a moment, I thought she was joking. The coffee spoon slipped from my fingers and clinked against the counter. Caleb, my son, was leaning against the doorway, hands in his pockets, face lowered toward the floor. His silence told me everything. Tara went on, talking through her bright smile, as if she were arranging a family picnic. "They've already given notice at their apartment. This will be easier for everyone. You'll have company, and we can handle maintenance and bills." The word we stuck like a burr. I poured myself another half cup of coffee, steadying the tremor in my wrist. "That's generous," I said, keeping my voice even, "but I wasn't aware I'd offered the house." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh meant to smooth over discomfort. "Oh, come on. Mom, you've got 3 bedrooms and live here all alone. It just makes sense." Her confidence was disorienting. She'd already decided. Somewhere between her sentence and my heartbeat, my home had become a space on her checklist. Caleb looked up briefly. "It's temporary," he murmured, eyes darting toward her. "Until they get settled." I met his gaze. He looked away. The air smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and the gardenias blooming outside the window. I'd tended those bushes for 30 years. My husband used to say, they were stubborn flowers, they thrived only when cared for gently, but they never forgot who planted them. I smiled then. A small, measured thing. "Well," I said, "if they're coming tomorrow, I'd better make sure everything's ready." Tara's expression brightened with relief. Mistaking composure for consent, she kissed my cheek, light as perfume. "You're such a blessing, Mom." When they left, the kitchen fell silent except for the slow drip of the coffee maker. I stood in that quiet for a long moment, then reached for a notepad by the phone. There were names and numbers I hadn't used in years, but I still remembered exactly where to start. That night, I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. The house glowed softly with what remained of the day, thin streaks of gold slipping through the blinds, pooling on the hardwood floors my husband had laid by hand. The quiet was heavy, the kind that made every creak of wood sound like a whisper. I started in the living room, where the scent of lemon polish still lingered. The couch sagged a little in the middle, the way it always had, and the brass lamp beside it still leaned slightly to the left. Small imperfections that only someone who'd lived here decades would notice. On the wall hung a dozen photo frames Caleb in his Navy ROTC uniform, our daughter, Lila, holding her firstborn, and beside them, the one that mattered most, Tom, standing at the shipyard, hand raised in a lazy salute, the Atlantic glinting behind him. I moved next to his study. It hadn't changed since the day he passed. His pipe still rested in the ashtray, cold but faintly aromatic with cherry tobacco. The desk bore scratches from years of letters and plans. I ran my fingers over the grain and felt the steady pulse of memory beneath it. In the hallway, the photo wall stretched from floor to ceiling. Birthdays, graduations, homecomings. Each frame carried laughter, paint-stained hands, summer heat. At the far end, a smaller frame held a picture of the porch light Tom had wired the first winter we moved in. "So you can always find your way home," he'd said, testing the switch with a grin. I paused by that light now, watching its soft halo spill across the front steps. Outside, the gardenias were in bloom again. Their fragrance reached through the screen door, steady and familiar. This wasn't just a house with rooms, it was a map of our lives, drawn in nail holes and fingerprints. And for the first time in years, I felt something stir beneath the ache, a certainty that no one was going to rewrite that map. but me. By morning, the house smelled faintly of coffee and salt air drifting in from the marsh. I carried a stack of old folders from the cabinet beneath the stairs and set them on the kitchen table. Most were labeled in Tom's handwriting: insurance, utilities, taxes, but one, thinner and newer, bore my own careful script: Wade Living Trust. I opened it slowly, smoothing out the papers that had yellowed around the edges. My attorney, Richard Larkin, had insisted on setting up the trust after Tom's heart surgery 12 years ago. "You'll thank me one day," he'd said. I hadn't understood then how right he was. Flipping through the pages, I found the section he'd marked in blue ink. Life estate reserved. Eleanor Wade retains full occupancy and decision rights for the duration of her natural life. I traced the words with my fingertip, the ink slightly raised under the light. So long as I was breathing, no one, not Caleb, not Tara, not her parents, could take this house from me without my consent. I found his business card tucked between two pages and smiled at the familiar name embossed in gold. Richard had retired last spring, but his son had taken over the practice. The number was still the same. I dialed, half expecting to hear the father's voice, and was met with the same calm tone, a bit younger but equally measured. Larkin and Associates. "This is Eleanor Wade," I said. "I believe my file is still active. I'd like a fresh copy of my recorded deed." "Of course." "Mrs. Wade, we'll courier it by tomorrow morning." When I hung up, the sunlight had shifted across the table, falling directly on the folder's cover. I pressed it closed and slid it neatly into a drawer. The sound of the latch was quiet but final, like the click of a lock fitting perfectly into place. Caleb came by that evening just as the sun was sliding behind the trees, its last light turning the kitchen window to amber glass. I'd set the table with leftover roast and a basket of cornbread. Habit, not invitation. He sat across from me, his sleeves rolled, eyes tired in a way that reminded me of when he was a boy, caught between telling the truth and protecting a friend. "Tara didn't mean to sound pushy," he began, breaking off a piece of bread he didn't eat. "She just thinks it might be easier for everyone if her parents helped out." Helped out. I kept my tone even. "By living here." He winced, then forced a small laugh. "You know how she is. She plans everything out loud. It's not final." I watched him carefully. He'd grown into his father's height, but not his steadiness. His hands fidgeted with the napkin, twisting it until the fabric wrinkled. "Caleb," I said softly, "did you already tell them it was settled?" He didn't answer. The only sound was the clock ticking above the stove. He stared at his plate as if it might explain what words couldn't. I wanted to reach for him, to remind him that silence can wound as deeply as words. But something in his posture stopped me. It wasn't defiance, it was surrender. So I let the quiet stretch between us, a heavy thing neither of us dared to move. Outside, the cicadas had started their evening chorus, filling the spaces where honesty should have lived. When he finally stood to leave, he murmured, "I'll talk to her." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Some lessons, I thought, were meant to echo until someone was ready to listen. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the house still wrapped in shadows. The quiet no longer felt heavy, it felt purposeful. There were things to be done, and for the first time in days, I knew exactly where to begin. I called a locksmith from a small family-owned shop on Bull Street. The man arrived just after 8, polite and efficient, his van humming softly in the driveway. He didn't ask questions, only nodded when I told him I wanted every exterior lock replaced. Same keys for all doors, he asked. "No," I said, "each one different." He smiled faintly, understanding more than I'd said. When he left, I brewed tea and sat at my desk, updating my homeowner's insurance policy online. I added a clause for restricted guest access and requested confirmation by mail. It felt strangely satisfying to click submit, as if each small task stitched another layer of safety back into place. By afternoon, I'd installed a small porch camera, nothing fancy, just enough to see who came and went. The instruction manual was written for someone younger, but I managed fine. My husband had taught me how to follow steps calmly, even when the wiring looked impossible. At the dining table, I assembled what I began calling my guest agreement packet. Inside, a copy of the trust, a simple contract outlining visitor boundaries, and a printed note that read, "Occupancy of main residence requires written consent by homeowner." Before dusk, I phoned the younger Mr. Larkin. I'd like the notarized deed as soon as possible. I said, he promised to deliver it by morning courier. When I hung up, the first streetlight outside flickered on. I stood for a moment in the doorway, the envelope on the table ready, my heartbeat steady. It was astonishing how peace could grow out of preparation. By Saturday morning, the air felt thicker than usual, humid even for Savannah. I had already set the kettle on the stove and opened the front curtains before I heard the low growl of an engine turning onto the street. The moving truck stopped at the curb with a long sigh of brakes. Tara stepped out of her car first. Crisp white shorts, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, confidence radiating like perfume. Her parents followed behind her, a polite pair of strangers holding paper coffee cups and looking faintly uncertain. "Morning, Mom," she called, as if this were an ordinary visit. "We'll start with my parents' furniture in your bedroom. That way, they can settle faster." I smiled. Warm and steady. "How thoughtful." I said, "Let's have tea first. The movers can wait a moment." She blinked, thrown off rhythm. Behind her, one of the movers coughed into his fist, unsure whether to proceed. Tara's mother, a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes, gave me an apologetic look. Her husband, tall and stiff, stared at the truck as though willing it to unload itself. Inside, I carried the tray into the dining room, the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays and graduations. I set out cups, saucers, and a plate of shortbread I'd baked the night before. The house smelled of lemon and sugar. "Please, sit," I said. Tara hesitated, then took the seat across from me. Her parents followed. The silence between us was smooth, polite, but edged with something sharp underneath. I poured the tea carefully, one cup at a time, the steady rhythm filling the room. "You've really gone to a lot of trouble," she said finally, trying to sound amused. "Not at all," I answered. "I like to make people feel welcome." Her father shifted uncomfortably. "This is very kind of you, Mrs. Wade. We weren't sure Tara cut him off." "Dad, it's fine. Mom already said it's settled." The word "settled" floated in the air like dust in sunlight visible, fragile, waiting to fall. I folded my hands around my teacup, the porcelain warm against my palms. "Well," I said gently, "since we're all here, I suppose it's the perfect time to go over a few small details before anything gets moved." Her smile faltered, just for a second. Outside, the movers waited in the heat, leaning against the truck, sensing that the real work had not yet begun. The air in the dining room had grown still. The ceiling fan turned lazily, stirring nothing. Tara was talking again, her tone bright but strained. "It'll be a smoother transition if we start today," she said. "My parents can move their things in before you get tired of all the commotion." I took a slow sip of tea and set my cup down carefully. "Before we move anything," I said, "I think it's best that we review the terms of their stay." Her mother's brows drew together. "Terms?" "Yes," I said, rising. I walked to the sideboard where a large cream-colored envelope rested, sealed and waiting. I placed it on the table between the teacups. "This is the welcome packet I've prepared for your convenience. Everything is explained clearly inside." Tara glanced at it, then back at me, her smile tightening. "You really didn't have to go to all this trouble." "Mom, they'll only be here a little while. I agree, I said. 48 hours, to be exact. She laughed. But the sound was brittle. You're joking. I shook my head. No. The agreement allows use of the garage suite only. 2 nights maximum. No access to the main residence. I turned to her parents, who now looked uneasy. You'll find a copy of my recorded life estate deed inside, along with a notarized no trespass notice signed, but not yet served. I trust that won't be necessary. Tara's father reached for the envelope and carefully peeled it open. Paper rustled. He read quickly, then slower, his eyes darting across the text. His wife leaned in beside him, her face draining of color as the meaning settled. Tara, she whispered, you didn't say she had ownership rights. She doesn't. Tara snapped, voice rising. This house belongs to Caleb's family, which means I interrupted softly. It belongs to me for as long as I draw breath. Your parents' lease, however, is their own concern, is outside. The sound of the movers shuffling boxes faltered, then stopped altogether. Through the open doorway, one of them looked in unsure, curious, then glanced toward the truck as if deciding whether to keep unloading. Tara stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. You've been planning this, she hissed. I folded my hands on the table. I've been preparing. Yes, there's a difference. Her father cleared his throat, his voice low and strained. We appreciate your hospitality. Mrs. Wade, I think there's been some misunderstanding. None at all. I said gently, you said you were moving tomorrow. Tara, you just didn't say where. Silence followed, so complete that even the ticking clock seemed to pause. Tara's mother rose, nodding faintly toward me. We'll speak later, dear, she murmured to her daughter. Her husband guided her toward the door, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand. Outside, the movers began reloading the furniture, their movements slow but certain. I watched through the window as Tara followed, her words sharp and incoherent against the afternoon heat. When the truck finally pulled away, the street returned to its usual stillness. I stood in the doorway, the porch light flickering softly above me, and felt the strange, quiet weight of victory, not loud, not triumphant, but firm and final, like the closing of a door that would stay locked for good. Caleb showed up just after sunset, headlights sweeping across the front lawn before fading into the quiet. I'd left the porch light on, the same way I always did when he was younger and missed curfew. Some habits never forget their purpose. He stood in the doorway, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes uncertain. She's gone to her parents' place, he said. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Mom, I didn't know it would go that far. She told me you agreed. I stepped aside and motioned for him to come in. The kitchen still smelled faintly of tea and shortbread. Though the tray sat untouched on the counter, Caleb leaned against the table, shoulders sagging. She was humiliated. He went on. They're furious. But she crossed a line, and His words faltered. I poured him a glass of water and set it in front of him. Sometimes, I said, a line is the only thing that shows us where we stand. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I should have stopped her. You should have, I said softly. But it's done. What matters now is what you learn from it. He reached across the table, rough hand closing around mine. I don't want this to come between us. It won't. I said, boundaries don't destroy love. Caleb, they protect what love builds. We sat there for a while, the silence no longer heavy but clean, like air after a storm. Outside, the crickets had begun their night song again, and the house felt steady, unshaken. Exactly as it was meant to be. Weeks passed quietly, the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. It just settles in. One Friday evening, I set the table for 3 instead of 6. The plates were mismatched, the way they'd always been. and a vase of gardenias stood in the center, their scent soft and familiar. Martha and June, two women from church, arrived with warm bread and stories that didn't need fixing small things about neighbors, choir rehearsals, a stray cat that had adopted the pastor's wife. Their laughter filled the kitchen in a way that felt honest, unforced. We ate slowly, talking between sips of tea, the conversation weaving through old memories and new beginnings. I realized I hadn't heard my own laughter in weeks. It came easily now, quiet but steady, like water finding its way back to the stream. After they left, I washed the dishes one by one, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the crickets outside. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt right-sized warm, contained, still beating with its own steady rhythm. When I turned off the kitchen light, the glow from the porch spilled softly across the floorboards, as if reminding me that even smaller tables can hold a great deal of love. Autumn came early that year, the air over the marsh turning cool and clean. I'd just finished trimming the gardenias when I heard a car door close out front. Through the window, I saw Tara standing by the fence, her hands clasped, eyes lowered. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if something in her had finally given way. "Hi, Mom," she said when I opened the door. Her voice trembled at the edges. "I won't stay long." I stepped aside, letting her in. She glanced around the living room as though it were unfamiliar territory. Her reflection caught briefly in the glass of a framed photo. Caleb as a boy, holding a kite against a bright Savannah sky. "They moved," she said quietly. "My parents, into a condo near the coast. It's better for them." I nodded. "I'm glad." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked softly above the mantel, marking a silence that wasn't cruel, just honest. Finally, she looked up. "I came to say I'm sorry for everything. I thought I was helping, but I see now what I almost destroyed." Her words carried no defense, only weariness. I reached for her hand and held it gently. "Sometimes," I said, "love gets tangled with control. Untangling it hurts, but it's still love underneath." Her eyes filled, and she nodded, squeezing my fingers before letting go. I walked her to the porch, the boards creaking beneath our steps. The sky was turning violet, the kind of Savannah dusk that feels like forgiveness made visible. "Thank you," she whispered before getting into her car. After the sound of her engine faded, I turned to the porch light, the same one Tom had wired all those years ago, and flipped the switch. Warm light spilled across the steps, soft and steady. "This house doesn't shut people out," I murmured into the quiet. "It just knows who belongs." The night settled around me, calm and whole, and the glow from the porch stretched into the dark like a small, unwavering promise.